Hello, and thank you again for listening to another Global Dyslexia Group podcast. My name is Darren Clark, and I'm one of the co-founders of the Global Dyslexia Group, and our aim is to raise awareness for dyslexia on a global scale. Now, guys, I want to share with you today's podcast, and it's titled Protesters, Armed Guards, Boarding the Wrong Plane, and Traveling with My Dyslexia. So guys, last year I smashed massively out of my comfort zone and I decided to start traveling the globe to help raise awareness for dyslexia. I started the year by booking a ticket to Kenya to meet with the owners of the Rare Gem Talent School in Nairobi. Now, this is an incredible school that helps children with dyslexia and other SPLDs. This was an incredible adventure and one that I will share in another podcast. But if you've not connected with Nancy or Phyllis, the sisters, the owners of the Rare Gem Talent School in Nairobi in Kenya, then please check them out. They are doing incredible work, like I mentioned, with regards to dyslexia and other SPLDs, and doing phenomenal work in Kenya. So let's get back to my trip to Malawi and how this adventure all came about. Now, from the work that I was doing in Kenya, I was contacted by an amazing lady called Juranji, who is the founder of the ABLE Foundation in Malawi. Now, after a few emails exchanged, I booked a ticket to fly out to help her raise awareness for dyslexia in her country. Now, I knew that this wouldn't be as straightforward as the Kenya trip, as it was a connecting flight. And to be honest, it did fill me with concern. However, we booked the ticket and off I went. The plan was to fly into Johannesburg, get the connecting flight to Malawi, meet my host, drive to the hotel, and grab some food before having a nice rest and beginning our work in Malawi. Now, if only it would have been that easy. I flew into the airport and was greeted by signs absolutely everywhere. Now, signs to some people might just seem quite simple, but you'd imagine the hustle and bustle of an airport, and it lies a problem. You can imagine that there's signs, just the actual signs for where you go and have where your plane's going to be taking off, the different times. The fact was as well that these signs were all printed in red. Now, for me, dyslexia, my dyslexia allows me to not see anything in red. Basically, everything in red just enables me to kind of see a big long blur, as if it was just like a red felt tip pen sprayed all the way across, almost like graffiti or something. So, standing in front of this sign, I stood there after a 10-hour flight with my case and bags and stared hard at this sign. I felt my eyes were going to pop out. All I could see was what was just a red blur, a great big red blob. However, everything on that red blob was all moving around. I managed to find an attendant who was in a rush and gave me what I thought at the time was the correct information. So, thinking that my flight was a couple of hours' time, I took myself off to a coffee shop and waited. 2 hours came and I went to find my flight. However, on entering my gate, I could see no one at the check-in desk and not a single person queuing. This obviously sent alarm bells ringing, so I walked around the airport and found a help desk and was told that the flight I was due to take to Malawi had just left over 2 hours ago. The information I was given was wrong, and I had missed the only flight that day to Malawi. Now, this drove my anxiety to a level which I've not experienced for a very long time. And alongside my ADHD and my dyslexia, I remember walking up and down the airport in a bit of a daze, just looking at the metal seats and thinking that would be my bed for the night. You can imagine, guys, it was just a really tense feeling. I'd flew from a 10-hour flight from the UK into Johannesburg, missed my connecting flight, and now I'm all alone and thinking, goodness, where am I going to sleep that night? So, however, I called to my partner and she booked me a hotel for that night and my next flight out to Malawi the following morning. So after feeling a little tired, I went to the hotel and got some rest. Well, not until I found exactly where my flight would be boarded the next day and triple checked the times. And guys, this probably took me about 2 hours. You know, I asked several different people because this is the thing with dyslexia. I don't know if it's just me or if it's anyone else can relate to this. You triple, quadruple check everything because you just want to make sure that you've got the right information. And after missing the previous flight, and obviously spending hundreds and hundreds of pounds, I wanted to make sure it was right. So I literally went and asked an attendant after attendant after attendant to see if that was the right flight for the next morning. So Went home. I went to the hotel, had a sleep, and the next day game. And thankfully, I boarded the flight and was off to Malawi to meet my host. My host, Duranji, and her husband were amazing and very welcoming. We got in the car and started traveling to my hotel. But I couldn't help but notice that whilst driving, the streets were empty and thought it was a little strange. I eventually mentioned it and was told of the mass protest that was going on in Blantyre and that there was a huge march to the Parliament buildings. And when asked where these buildings were, Duranji replied that they were opposite my hotel. We pulled up to the hotel and I could hear lots of noise in the distance. And then after around 30 minutes after checking in, I could start to see people walking past the hotel. This went on through the night and there were thousands upon thousands of people all marching past the hotel. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, I did feel a little concerned as the noise and the sheer number of people were overwhelming. It was almost like when a football match finishes and the whole crowd just leaves the building. But this just went on all night, thousands upon thousands of people. So you can see why it felt a bit overwhelming. When I woke up in the morning, I checked out the local news only to find out that there had been a lot of unrest that night. Even though I could hear the noise, the papers were full of the news about the events. I remember thinking that morning about lots of things and whether or not I'd be able to carry out our tour of Malawi and get to the places for the events that we had arranged, as there were many roadblocks. However, my hosts were confident that they were able to come and pick me up, and we managed to go off to our first place. We've been planning this for a good few months and put lots of marketing out on social media, both in Malawi and in the UK. So I was really hoping for a good turnout. And this didn't disappoint. When we got to the event, we had lots of parents, teachers, some students attended the event. And it was after the event took off, it was a huge success. I was able to do a talk around dyslexia, sharing my personal story, but we'll also be able to get some other speakers in and to share their experiences, but ultimately answer some questions around dyslexia. Now, after this event, we headed off to Lilongwe, which was about a 6-hour drive, and we had another big event to carry out. Now, the car journey to Lilongwe was quite the adventure, as there was parts where there was nothing around but fields. Then you drive through tiny little towns where people would come up to the car and try and sell you their crops that they have grown, and it was just amazing the culture there and just seeing the different. Just the different array of colors, in the sense of, you know, the fruit that they were bringing out in the vegetables. It was just glorious to see. And then you would drive then continuously, and then you wouldn't see a soul for about an hour, and then suddenly you turn up into the village as well. However, the road from Blantyre to Lilongwe is still quite treacherous, and you have to make sure that you have your eyes on the road the whole time, as there are so many obstacles in the road. Anything from giant holes in the road, animals, people. I think while traveling, I had witnessed several vehicles on the side of the road, and and I think we witnessed, quite a bad accident, sadly. But that's how treacherous the road was. But thankfully, we arrived safely to our next hotel, and the next morning, we drove the short trip to our next event. This was similar to the one that we carried out before, and again was hoping for a big turnout, because of all the marketing and all the work that we've been doing for months and months ahead. We had parents, teachers, and some local businesses attend our talk, and it was fantastic. So many questions, so much awareness created in a country that at that time had very little knowledge of dyslexia. And when I say little knowledge, I'm almost saying if you were to type in at the time, dyslexia, Malawi, hardly anything would come up. So we carried out lots more awareness events also during my time in Malawi, and I met so many wonderful people. And not only was I able to share my own personal experiences of dyslexia, I was also able to hear everyone else's stories. And I know I absolutely love stories. So I want to share with you one of the stories that stuck with me by this teacher. She told me of one of her students who had basically been given up on the educational system. Now, I can relate to this because I too had been given up on the educational system, had kind of lost me. So I felt like I kind of had the educational side of it stolen from me. So I could really relate to this. So she told me of one of her students had basically been given up in the educational system, and her confidence was so low that she couldn't even get out of bed in the morning without the fear of going to school. She later moved to yet another school, and this is when the teacher that I was speaking to had noticed that she had signs of dyslexia. She worked really hard to get her assessed, and fast forward a few years, that student is now excelling in her studies, and the mother told the teacher that she literally leaps out of bed on her school day. This story was definitely one that stuck with me. It's one I like I said, I can relate to in the sense of the educational side of it being stolen from me. But it was just amazing to hear the teachers explain this story and how that student now really sort of fell in love with education again. So my week of raising for dyslexia had come to the end in Malawi, and we spoke to hundreds of people and put dyslexia firmly at the front of people's minds. And that, for the experience, I am incredibly humbled and grateful for it. However, the adventure of my own dyslexia travels didn't stop there, as I had a few more challenges ahead. I said goodbye to my amazing host and got the taxi to the airport. And en route, I sat and thought of all the amazing people I had met and the stories that they shared. I grabbed my cases, tipped the taxi driver, and walked into the airport. Now, I don't know if you've ever flown from Malawi, but it's very small in comparison to main airports. So I thought, what could possibly go wrong? I went to the check-in desk and showed my passport and ticket, and then turned right and saw a sign that said waiting room for boarders. I went through the metal detectors, went onto a tiny room with metal benches, and at that time there wasn't anyone else. So I sat down, grabbed my earphones, and waited 2 hours until my flight was boarding. Time went past and more people came and sat down. And then suddenly, a lady from the airport came and stood at the front and asked us to get on the shuttle bus to our flight. I stood up, walked over, and noticed that the lady was just waving her arms as if to rush us. This meant I didn't show her my boarding pass and just got on the bus. We travelled up to the plane, and I noticed that the plane we'd arrived in was half the size of the one that we came over. I knew it was a connecting flight, so I expected the plane to be smaller, but this was tiny in comparison. I mean, the plane that we came over, obviously from UK to Johannesburg, was huge. It was a Virgin airline, but the flight from Johannesburg to Malawi was quite small, but this plane was even smaller. So I thought, oh well. I thought as I boarded the flight with my large backpack, and again, the flight attendants didn't check my boarding pass as I was actually getting on the plane. So on I went, squeezing down this tiny aisle and trying not to hit people with my backpack. I found my seat number, and I saw that it was a window seat, and the other seat next to it already had someone in it. The gentleman was a very large bodybuilding chap, and his arms took up both seats. He was huge, and I knew this wouldn't be the most comfortable of flights. He kindly moved, and I squeezed in, and at this point, I was basically pushed up against the window. Through no fault of his own, he was a very, very big guy. I went to put my earphones in. Just as the flight attendant started the safety talk, I quickly took them out, and I'm so pleased I did, as she then started to thank everyone for boarding this flight to Lilongwe. Oh my God, I am on the wrong plane. Now, this sent a very worrying feeling through me. I'm not going to lie. So I began to ask the very large chap if he wouldn't mind moving, as I'm currently on the wrong plane. I'm not quite sure to this day what he thought of me, as he just kept staring at me and couldn't quite understand what I was saying. To be fair, it's not every day you get on the wrong plane, I guess. Anyway, he kindly moved, and I went rushing up the aisle with my backpack catching the heads of most passengers. I then proceeded to tell the flight attendants that I was on the wrong flight. And again, she just stared at me in disbelief. She then eventually went and spoke to the pilot, who asked permission to open the doors. At this point, the engine was on, the doors were locked, and everyone was strapped in for takeoff. The pilot agreed, and the doors were open, and I was literally sent out onto the tarmac. Now, as soon as my feet touched the tarmac, the plane doors shut, and the plane was gone. I stood on the tarmac of that runway for around 10 minutes, really not knowing what to do or where to go. Then in the distance, I could see this shuttle bus coming towards me. Now, the door swung open and the driver yelled something to me, and on I went. However, on returning back to the airport, I was greeted by not one, but two armed guards pointing their guns and asking me where I came from and why I was in the middle of the runway. I was then taken to an office and questioned and was asked at this point, the questions just kept coming in, and it was almost like, I don't know if you've ever watched Snoopy or, with like Charlie Brown, and you just remember that teacher, and it's kind of just going wah, 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 wah. I just couldn't, my anxiety was high, my ADHD was kicking in, my dyslexia was just all over the place. So I couldn't really answer, any of the questions that they were kind of given. Luckily enough, with my jumbled kind of talk, I was able to say enough to convince them of my mistake. Now, the problem I had was that the plane that I was due to board originally was boarding at the same time as the wrong plane that I boarded earlier, if that makes sense. So I was escorted by the armed police through the other part of the airport, which is for international flights, which I didn't know nothing about. So I had to go through all the security again and back onto the shuttle bus that I had been on twice, and then taken to the plane that at that point was full of people all strapped in and looking very annoyed with the delay. However, the drama still wasn't over, as the confusion with the armed guards, they had taken my boarding pass off me. So while I was being rushed through security, I didn't think to ask for it back. So when the flight attendants asked if I was unable to show it, this threw me into a massive panic. So you can imagine what happened when I turned up to the plane and I didn't have my boarding pass. Yep, you've guessed it. I had to get back on the shuttle bus and back to the airport through security again and pick up my boarding pass from the security office. I returned to the plane, showed my ticket, and walked past 80% of the people on the plane looking very, very cross, to say the least. So from within 20 minutes, I had got on the wrong plane, then back on into the airport, back onto the right plane, and then back into the airport to get my boarding pass, and then back onto the right plane. So you'll be relieved to know that I got on the right plane in the end with my boarding pass, and I got to Johannesburg. I successfully got my connecting flight and headed home. You see, I've always struggled with traveling with dyslexia, and there are so many other adventures just like this. And although this journey was very scary and stressful at times, I would never stop traveling, and especially because of my dyslexia. I hope you enjoyed that podcast, guys. And it just goes to show that even if we have dyslexia, even if we fear the unknown and we struggle massively, you can achieve amazing things. And if anything, you can create a story from it. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. And please feel free to listen to any of our other Global Dyslexia Group podcasts. And we'll be speaking to you soon. Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.